The first sign that something was profoundly wrong wasn't a body or a confession. It was the silence. Detective Elias Eli Vance, a man whose entire career was built on listening to the worst sounds the city of Atheria could produce, hated silence. This one had an echo, a cavernous, empty quiet in a room that should have been chaotic. The room was a small, windowless server vault beneath the decommissioned Atheria Psychiatric Hospital, a place the city had quietly purchased to use as a secondary police evidence archive. The air was frigid, thick with the sterile dust of disuse and the faint, metallic tang of old electricity. Eli stood, hands on his hips, staring at the empty evidence shelving. The chief had called him in personally. A zero-day incident, he'd said, his voice clipped and strained. Not a fire, not a flood. Something stolen. The evidence was from the cold case files, decades of unspeakable human cruelty, all digitally cataloged and physically stored here. Everything from the infamous Iron Doll murders of the 90s to the more recent, but equally baffling, phantom sculpted disappearances. All locked away. Except now, the records showed the theft of exactly 7 items. 7 specific, seemingly random physical artifacts pulled from 7 different, unrelated cases spanning 40 years. So, what are we looking at, Vance? Asked Captain Lena Morales, her face hard and unreadable under the harsh fluorescent lights. She was his superior, sharp as a razor, and utterly devoid of patience for the unexplained. A collector? A psychohistorian? Eli ran a gloved hand along a shelf where a plaster cast of a bizarre, ritualistic bite mark should have been. A collector wouldn't know which 7 to take, Captain. And this place, it's a fortress. No forced entry. Every single electronic lock, every motion sensor, every pressure plate, they're all green. 0 day. The system thinks nothing happened. He stopped at a vacant spot where a small, carved wooden box, the only physical evidence from a 1982 missing person case, had been. That case was personal, a young girl named Sarah, never found. Except one thing, Eli continued, his voice dropping. He turned and pointed to the single, anomalous object left behind, an old, disconnected rotary telephone sitting on a metal workbench in the center of the room. It was an antique, out of place, its black plastic housing gleaming unnaturally in the sterile light. That wasn't here when they sealed the vault last week, Captain Morales stated, her hand instinctively going to her sidearm. Eli stepped toward it, his boots crunching lightly on the dusty concrete. He saw no wires, no power source. It was just an inert piece of history. Then, the bell jar around his ears broke. The phone rang. It was a sharp, grating BRR ring that ripped through the silence, making Morales jump and causing Eli's heart to hammer a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The sound was impossible, an electrical pulse from nothing, a call on a deadline. Eli stared at the phone. The bell stopped. A metallic, wet click came from the earpiece. He didn't need to pick it up. The voice, a low, wet whisper that sounded like it was speaking through a mouthful of gravel and blood, filled the room. It didn't come from the phone. It seemed to resonate through the bones of the building itself. The missing pieces are now 1. The voice paused, a ragged intake of breath that was too loud, too close. You have 72 hours, Detective Vance. Or the city will stop breathing. The line went dead with a heavy, final clunk of the receiver hitting the cradle, though no one had touched it. The sound, impossibly, came after the voice. Eli looked down. The phone's dial was now perfectly centered on the number 7. This wasn't a collector. This wasn't a historian. This was an invitation. And the killer already knew his name. Captain Morales's face was pale, reflecting the sterile white lights of the vault. She didn't need to ask how the caller knew Eli's name. The impossible fact of the ringing, disconnected phone was enough of a distraction. 72 hours, she repeated, her voice low and dangerous. This isn't a hoax, Vance. You hear that voice and tell me it's a goddamn prank. Eli ignored the question, his eyes fixed on the archaic phone. He didn't dare touch it. The 7 items. They're the key. Whatever this person is, they link those cold cases. They tied up 7 separate threads and made one knot. They pulled the official digital manifests. The 7 stolen items, a plaster cast of a unique bite mark, the Iron Doll Murders, 1996, the small, carved wooden box, Sarah Kincaid missing person, 1982, a heavily oxidized copper wire noose, the Serpent Killer, 2010, a single, unnaturally white human tooth, the Silent Witness, 2005, a shard of colored glass, chemically traced to a specific type of prism, the Prism Murders, 1971, a water-damaged, child's drawing of a man with no face, the Lighthouse Abductions, 1989, a small vial containing a dark, viscous, non-human fluid, case 44B, unidentified animal attack, 2018, a bite, a box, a noose, a tooth, glass, a drawing, and a fluid, Morales summarized, running a hand through her short hair. It's meaningless. 7 different modus operandi, 7 different eras, 7 different geographies within the city. Eli leaned over the printouts. Not meaningless. It's a recipe. Each item is the only physical piece of evidence left for each case. The kind of evidence that only the investigating officers and the killer would know survived the initial purge. He paused, a chilling realization settling on him. Captain, the storage facility only holds secondary archives. The primary files, the actual case folders, are across town in the records hall. Whoever stole these didn't just know what to take, they knew where to find the 7 pieces of the puzzle that the system itself tried to bury. Morales's comm crackled to life. It was Sergeant Miller, stationed outside the vault door. Captain, we found something. An envelope. Tucked under a ventilation grate outside the main lock. Eli and Morales exchanged the look, the implicit question hanging in the air. Was it the thief's way in, or a gift? They hurried out. Miller handed Morales a thick, unmarked manila envelope. Inside, Eli found not another threat, but a collection of pristine, glossy black and white photos. They were clearly surveillance images, but unlike any he'd seen. The focus was unnaturally sharp, the lighting theatrical, like high-end art photography. The photos showed the copper noose hanging from a makeshift wooden frame, the bite mark cast resting on a bed of dry ice. The wooden box split open, its interior exposed. The final photo was a wide shot, taken from a great distance, looking down a dark, empty street. In the foreground, standing alone under the eerie, amber glow of a street lamp, was a figure. Tall, cloaked in shadow, utterly featureless, yet clearly looking directly at the camera. Pinned to the back of the photo was a single, cryptic note, typed on heavy cardstock. The archives hold the blueprint. The pieces form the key. The key opens the red room. Eli looked up, adrenaline and cold dread mixing in his stomach. The archives, that's the records hall, Captain. The primary files. The full dossiers. He clenched the picture of the cloaked figure. He wants us to find the blueprint. He wants us to put the 7 back together. Morales keyed her radio. Listen up. We're diverting every available resource to the Atheria Records Hall. Seal the perimeter. Nobody in, nobody out. Vance and I are going in. We're looking for a blueprint, a key, and a red room. Eli glanced back at the abandoned server vault, the black rotary phone silently mocking them, the single number 7 glowing faintly on the dial. The timer had started. The Atheria Records Hall was an architectural anachronism, a brutalist concrete bunker built in the late 70s, designed to withstand a siege, or perhaps just boredom. Inside, the sheer volume of paper was overwhelming. Aisles of towering metal shelves stretched into the dim distance, housing the primary files of every police investigation in the city's history. The air was dry, heavy with the scent of aged paper and institutional decay. Detective Vance and Captain Morales moved swiftly, flanked by a six-man tactical team. The captain had ordered a silent, methodical search. They didn't know what they were looking for, only where to look. A blueprint related to the 7 cold cases. Eli pulled the files for the 7 cases, laying the brittle manila folders out on a long, central inspection table. The Iron Doll, Sarah Kincaid, the Serpent Killer, 7 tragedies bound together by 7 seemingly random objects. He called it a blueprint, Captain, Eli muttered, paging through the chaotic, sprawling file on the Prism murders. Blueprints are structural. They show connection, not coincidence. Morales, who was examining the original photographic evidence from the 1989 lighthouse abductions, suddenly stiffened. Vance, look at this. The child's drawing. The photo showed the water-damaged drawing of a man with no face, one of the 7 stolen items, clipped to a witness interview sheet. But Morales was pointing not at the drawing, but at the file folder itself. The case number, she said, tapping the ink-stamped code on the folder tab. LHA 89-7. Eli felt a cold spike of recognition. The rotary phone in the vault had the dial set to 7. He quickly checked the other folders: the Iron Doll murders, IDM 96-7 the Serpent Killer, SK 10-7 Sarah Kincaid, SKI 82-7 the Prism murders, PM 71-7 the Silent Witness, SW 05-7 Case 44B, CA 18-7 inch. Every single one of the stolen cases, Eli breathed out, was the 7th major investigation opened in its respective year. A detail buried so deep, only the police department's internal indexer would even know it. He didn't just know the evidence, Morales said, her eyes narrowed with dawning horror. He knew the system. Eli's eyes moved from the numerical coincidence to the paper itself. He started tearing through the original police reports, looking for any mention of the number 7, any shared names, or any unique jargon. Nothing. It was a dead end, a numerical distraction from the true structural link. Then, his gaze landed on the case log for the Serpent Killer file. It was a long list of dates and actions, mostly mundane: filings, interviews, DNA requests. Halfway down the page, next to an entry detailing the recovery of the copper wire noose, the stolen item, was a small, hand-drawn symbol. It was crude, a hasty sketch, but distinct. A stylized depiction of the number 7 with a crescent moon shape cradled in the upper curve. Eli flipped through the other 6 files frantically. The Iron Doll file, on a lab report, near the entry for the plaster bite mark, the same symbol. The Silent Witness, sketched on the margin of a psychiatric evaluation, near the mention of the white tooth. It was on a forgotten memo in every single file, always drawn near the entry detailing the single piece of stolen evidence. It wasn't an official symbol. It was a signature, not of the killer, but of the officer who had initially processed the evidence. This symbol, Captain, Eli said, pointing to the Serpent Killer file. It's in all 7. It's the blueprint. It links the evidence, not the crimes. Morales grabbed the case log and skimmed the officer's initials next to the sketch. Jr. That's Detective Jonas Reed. Retired 10 years ago. He was the original primary on 3 of these and assisted on the others. A wave of cold certainty washed over Eli. Jonas Reed, a decorated, seemingly unremarkable detective, had handled the key evidence in 7 of the city's most horrific, unsolvable cases. The Red Room, Eli whispered, remembering the note. Where would Reed keep a blueprint, Captain? His house? Storage? Just. Then, a faint, rhythmic sound began to tap against the inspection table. Tap, tap, tap. Eli and Morales froze, looking around the cavernous archive. No movement. no wind. The sound was coming from the center of the table, directly beneath the pile of 7 folders. Morales slowly lifted the folders. Beneath them, etched into the dusty surface of the old metal table, was a new image, the stylized 7 crescent symbol, not drawn with chalk or ink, but scratched deeply into the metal, and just below the symbol, another cryptic message, scrawled hastily in what looked like a dark, dried substance. The blueprint is the weaver. The weaver hides in the red thread. Ask the last one about the weaver's first thread. The rhythmic tapping stopped. The room was silent once more, leaving only the chilling implication that the weaver knew exactly where they were and what they were looking at. The scratch marks on the table were still vibrating with the energy of impossible intrusion. The tactical team, which had been spread out across the archive, converged instantly. They found nothing, no exit, no shadow, no displaced air. The weaver is Jonas Reed, Eli stated, his voice low and firm, pointing to the message. The weaver hides in the red thread. Ask the last one about the weaver's first thread. Morales was already on her internal radio. Run Detective Jonas Reed's current address, phone, and known associates. Priority 1. Send a preliminary unit to his last known residence, non-confrontational, just observation. Eli, reread the clue. The last one, that means the last victim or the last case. Case 44B, 2018. The unidentified fluid. We need the full details on the victim or the lead officer. He snatched the Case 44B file, flipping through the sparse reports. The case was a true outlier, a discovery of animal remains with highly unusual puncture wounds, ruled an unfortunate wildlife encounter. The only remaining evidence was the vial of viscous fluid, which had defied identification. The lead officer was Detective Serena Thorne, now working cold cases. Eli found her contact number and dialed it immediately. Thorne answered on the second ring, her voice tired and professional. Thorne. Serena, it's Eli Vance. We need to talk about Case 44B, the animal fluid. Specifically, the weaver's first thread. Did Jonas Reed ever mention something like that to you? A heavy silence followed. When Thorne finally spoke, her voice was a near whisper, filled with residual trauma. Jonas, he was my training officer on that case. He was always obsessed with how disconnected it was. He kept saying it wasn't an animal, it was a test. He called it the 0 point, the start of something bigger. He had a theory about the 7 unsolved cases. What was the theory, Serena? Eli pressed, pacing the aisle. He thought they were all connected to one location. He had this private map of Atheria, where he marked where all the pieces of evidence were originally found. He used a red grease pencil and called the lines he drew between them the red thread. The weaver hides in the red thread, and the first thread? Eli asked. He said the very first place the weaver struck was the source. The first thread was where the bite mark came from. The Iron Doll murders. The victim, a college student named Jessica Hayes. Found in the basement of an old factory near the river, the Riverside Mill. The pieces snapped into place with a terrifying click. The 7 items, the number 7, the officer who handled them, the map connecting them. Morales's radio cut in, jarringly loud. Captain, we have Reed's residence secured. But we have a problem. The preliminary unit reported the house is empty. Totally cleared out. And they found something on the front porch. Report, Morales demanded. A package, Captain. A small, sealed, wooden crate. Addressed to Detective Elias Vance. The return address is the Riverside Mill, Atheria, Sector 7. Eli stared at the phone in his hand. The rotary phone in the vault. The note on the archive table. The killer wasn't hiding. He was leading them, moving one step ahead, using the 72-hour deadline as a clock for his performance. He wants us at the mill, Captain, Eli said. He wants us to find the red room. He sent us the key. Eli took the mill's address from Morales. The Riverside Mill, a massive, forgotten shell of a building near the city's waterfront. He knew the layout. It was a sprawling labyrinth of rusted machinery and collapsing brick. As he moved to the door, Thorne's voice came back over the line, strained with sudden panic. Eli, wait. I just remembered something else Jonas said. He said the red thread only becomes visible when the light is wrong. Before Eli could ask what that meant, his own service phone, the secure digital line, flashed. A new text message, sender unknown. The message was a single photo, the interior of the wooden crate the team had just secured. Inside, resting on a bed of shredded black paper, was the single, white human tooth stolen from the silent witness case, and resting beside the tooth was a small, crudely made key, covered in what looked like dried red paint, but Eli knew was more likely dried, old blood. The key to the red room was now in Atheria, waiting for him. And the clock was ticking down from 72 hours. The Riverside Mill stood like a decaying leviathan on the edge of the Atheria industrial zone, its blackened brick facade punctuated by countless shattered windows. It had been abandoned for over 3 decades, a perfect, sprawling canvas for decay and secrets. Eli and Morales entered through a rusted loading dock door, followed by a heavily armed tactical team. The interior was a vast, echoing space filled with the skeletal remains of industrial machinery, draped in thick cobwebs and shadows. Flashlights cut cones through the dust motes suspended in the frigid air. The first murder was in the basement, Eli reminded Morales, checking his weapon. Jessica Hayes, 1996. The Iron Doll. He wants us to follow the path, Captain. They located the rickety wooden stairs leading down. As they descended, the damp air grew heavier, carrying the metallic scent of rust and stagnant water. The basement was a maze of concrete columns and massive, defunct gears. Morales kept the team spread out but close. Keep an eye out for anything marked with that symbol, the 7 and the crescent. That's our signpost. They searched for nearly 20 minutes, the silence broken only by the crunch of debris underfoot and the static of their radio chatter. They found nothing until Eli pointed his light at a far, rarely accessed corner of the sublevel, a small, recessed door that was clearly new, made of heavy, unmarked steel, sealed with a brass padlock. The padlock was identical to the one on the small wooden crate containing the tooth. Eli produced the blood-red key sent by the weaver. It fit the lock perfectly. With a metallic thunk, the lock fell away. Morales held the team back. Vance, if this is a trap, we clear it first. He doesn't want to kill us, Captain. He wants us to see the weaver's work, Eli countered, pulling the heavy door open. The room beyond was impossibly small, a repurposed utility closet. It was not a grand lair. It was a workspace. The first thing Eli saw was the color. The walls, floor, and ceiling were completely painted in a thick, uniform coat of deep, unsettling crimson. The red room, in the center of the tiny space, illuminated by a single, bare-hanging bulb, was a simple wooden table. On it, 2 of the stolen items were arranged like pieces in a grotesque diorama, the plaster cast of the unique bite mark, the Iron Doll murders, the heavily oxidized copper wire noose, the serpent killer. But they weren't just sitting there. The noose was looped around the cast, pulling the plaster taut, creating a strange, contorted shape, and next to the display was another object, a small, antique reel-to-reel tape recorder, running silently, its spools turning slowly. Eli approached the table, his heart pounding. The air in the room was cloyingly warm, and it smelled distinctly of dust and old, dried human blood, not paint. The red on the walls was too deep, too textured to be mere color. Morales's voice was a harsh whisper behind him. Vance, the walls. That isn't paint. Eli's flashlight beam swept across the ceiling. The material covering the surfaces was dried and flaky. It had the viscosity and color of old, oxidized gore. Eli focused back on the tape recorder. He tapped the stop button and then rewind. When he hit play, the silence of the mill was shattered by the sound of a woman screaming, a raw, frantic sound that ended in a sharp, wet choke. The tape cut out, replaced by the same wet, gravelly whisper from the rotary phone. "Welcome, Detective Vance. You found the first 2 stitches of the red thread." The voice paused, followed by a series of heavy, measured footfalls, the sound of someone walking on loose gravel, muffled but close. "The weaver binds the wounds. The bite is silenced by the noose. Find the box that holds the tooth. It sleeps where the water never stops." The message ended. The tape clicked off. Eli knew the next location instantly. The box that holds the tooth, the stolen wooden box and the stolen tooth were the next pieces. Where the water never stops, that could only be the Atheria Reservoir Filtration Plant, a complex of subterranean concrete tanks and perpetually flowing pipes. But there was a new element in the room. Hanging on a hook by the door, seemingly untouched by the red coating, was a pristine, pressed police uniform jacket. It was Captain Morales's old jacket from her days as a beat cop, the one with the specialized stitching on the collar that she had always claimed was a lucky charm. A note was pinned to the jacket. "Tick-tock, Captain. Did you remember the key to your lucky charm?" Morales gasped, her hand instinctively flying to her neck. She had kept that key, the small sterling silver key to a locket she always wore, for 20 years. The locket was gone, and standing next to where the jacket hung, impossibly etched into the crimson wall as if carved into flesh, was the stylized symbol of the 7 crescent. The weaver was no longer just targeting the cases. He was tearing the thread of the police force itself. The theft of Captain Morales's locket key was a direct, psychological strike, a violation of her personal security that surpassed the cold, systemic nature of the earlier thefts. It confirmed that the weaver, Jonas Reed, was not just playing a game of morbid investigation. He was settling old, intimate scores. "My locket key," Morales whispered, touching the bare skin on her throat where the chain usually rested. Her professional composure was fractured. "He took it before we even got the call. He's been watching us, Eli." "Watching me?" Eli pointed the flashlight at the note pinned to her jacket. "Tick-tock, Captain. Did you remember the key to your lucky charm? This isn't random. Reed knows you better than we know him." He took a breath, forcing his mind back to the trail. "The reservoir. That's the next stage. We move now." The Atheria Reservoir Filtration Plant was a sprawling complex of massive, buried concrete tanks built below a public park. The next location, the box that holds the tooth. "It sleeps where the water never stops," was clear. As they drove, Eli contacted Detective Thorne again, bringing her up to speed on Jonas Reed's confirmed identity as the weaver. "The locket key, Eli." Thorne's voice crackled over the secure line. "I remember that locket. Morales used to wear it when she was still on patrol. I overheard Reed talking about it once, years ago. He said it was the key to her heart, a stupid, personal joke. But the locket itself, it's a standard silver police issue. It holds a small photo of her former partner." The revelation hit Eli like a physical blow. Morales's old partner, Detective Mark Delacroix, had been killed in the line of duty, an unsolved, traumatic incident that had defined Morales's career. Reed was using the Weaver's game to drag a past trauma into the present. They reached the reservoir compound. It was eerily quiet, the only sound the low, persistent thrum of the underground pumps. Eli and Morales, with a smaller, focused team, located a rarely used maintenance hatch leading to the subterranean filtration tanks, a network of echoing, concrete chambers filled with the ceaseless rush of filtered water. The air was humid, heavy with the clean, sharp smell of ozone and chlorine. They navigated the narrow catwalks above the churning water, flashlights dancing over the immense, dark pools. They found the location in the oldest section, Tank 7. Suspended precisely 3 feet above the surface of the roiling water, held aloft by two thin, taut steel cables, was the stolen small, carved wooden box, Sarah Kincaid, 1982. Its surface was already slick with condensation, moments from slipping into the dark water below. Next to the box, pinned to a vertical pipe with a massive, rusted utility spike, was another piece of evidence. The small, white human tooth, the silent witness, 2005. It was stuck into a piece of paper. Eli carefully retrieved the paper. It was an old, faded police receipt form for evidence storage code 77. On the back was a handwritten message, scrawled quickly in pencil. The red thread links the forgotten. The box held nothing, but was the first lie. The tooth was not human, but was the last truth, and directly below the message, a pristine photo showing the inside of Morales's locket. Instead of the expected photo of Delacroix, there was a tiny slip of paper with a single word written on it. Sarah. Eli looked up at Morales. Sarah Kincaid, 1982. The girl who went missing, whose only evidence was the wooden box that supposedly held nothing. Morales's face was a mask of cold fury. Reed wasn't just my colleague, Vance. He was there when Mark was shot. He handled Mark's evidence. The key he stole, it wasn't just to my locket. It was the key to what was inside the locket. Before they could process the implication that Morales's dead partner and the missing girl Sarah were somehow linked, the overhead lights in the chamber violently burst, showering them with glass and plunging the entire chamber into absolute darkness. Simultaneously, the sound of heavy, shifting masonry echoed from the chamber walls, and the roar of the filtering water suddenly intensified, becoming a deafening, dangerous torrent. A low, familiar sound cut through the chaos, the ringing of a telephone. A second rotary phone, somehow placed on a dry girder directly above the water, its impossible bell grating in the dark. This time, Eli didn't hesitate. He shouted for the team to find cover and hit the emergency pump controls, while he aimed his flashlight toward the ringing sound, illuminating the rotary phone. It was set, once again, to the number 7. The wet whisper filled the now thundering chamber. The Weaver is testing the flow, detective. Mark knew the truth of Sarah. And the prism waits for the no-face to see the light. Find the center. The thread is waiting where the silence breaks. The phone went dead. The box, suspended above the water, had begun to swing violently on its cables. Morales lunged onto the girder, grabbing the box just as one of the cables snapped, the roaring water threatening to pull her into the dark pool below. The Weaver was closing the gap. The game was becoming deadly. Morales, soaked and shaking from the near drowning, secured the wooden box. The emergency system kicked in, slowly stabilizing the water flow, but the chilling realization remained: the Weaver could manipulate the city's infrastructure as easily as he manipulated its cold cases. Mark knew the truth of Sarah, Eli repeated, his voice strained as they climbed out of the dangerous tank. Why would a cop killed in the line of duty know about a missing girl from before his time on the force? Morales clutched the rescued box. Mark was an orphan. Adopted. He was much older than me. He started as a patrol officer in '81, a year before Sarah Kincaid disappeared. She opened the box. It was empty, just as the Weaver's message claimed it held nothing. Eli focused on the next clue. The prism waits for the no-face to see the light. Find the center. The thread is waiting where the silence breaks. The prism referred to the stolen shard of colored glass, the Prism Murders, 1971. The no-face referred to the stolen child's drawing of a man with no face, the Lighthouse Abductions, 1989. The center, Eli declared. The only place referred to as the center in old Atheria police files is the Central Communications Tower, built in 1971, the same year as the Prism Murders. And where the silence breaks, that's where all the radio chatter converges. The Central Communications Tower was the single tallest structure in Atheria, a massive, cylindrical broadcasting antenna that hummed with constant, low-level electromagnetic energy. It was sealed tight, its top floors reserved for emergency broadcasting equipment. They secured access to the observation deck, a restricted area near the top, using an emergency override code. Stepping out onto the narrow, wind-whipped platform, the sheer height made their heads swim. Below them, Atheria was a glittering grid. Silent from this altitude, a small, crude wooden stand was set up near the central antenna mast. On the stand, the weaver had arranged the two pieces of evidence. The shard of colored glass was carefully positioned. Directly behind it, angled to catch the faint, high-altitude city light, was the child's drawing of a man with no face. As Eli approached, the setting sun, dipping below the skyline, sent a final, powerful ray of light straight through the prism glass. The shard fractured the light, projecting a small, sharp 7-color rainbow onto the surface of the paper drawing. Where the projected red light fell on the drawing, the paper seemed to heat and smoke instantly. Then, the center of the drawing, the blank, no-face area, flared with a white-hot glow, melting the paper away and revealing a tiny, hidden inscription burned into the wooden stand underneath. The inscription was not the weaver's usual taunt. It was a single, 3-digit number, crudely burned into the wood, 821. August 2nd, 1982, Morales breathed out. The day Sarah Kincaid went missing. Eli ran his fingers over the charred wood. No. Look at the context, Captain. This isn't a date. It's an entry code. A file index. He quickly accessed the city's decommissioned police indexing database on his secure tablet, inputting the code, 8-2-1. The system returned a single entry, labeled Personal File. The name attached to the file, Sarah Delacroix. Sarah Delacroix, Eli repeated, the realization hitting him like a punch to the gut. She wasn't Sarah Kincaid. She was Mark Delacroix's sister. The missing girl from 1982 was his family. And the wooden box was the only thing left, the first lie, to cover up the connection. Morales's personal tragedy and the city's oldest cold case were now one. And Jonas Reed, the weaver, knew the secret that Mark Delacroix had carried to his grave. Just as the sun vanished and the light faded, the nearby emergency broadcasting speaker hissed, then clicked on. The noise was raw static, then the familiar wet whisper. The red thread binds the kin. Mark tried to tell the truth with the box. I finished the binding with his sister's face. The voice was closer, more triumphant than before. The wind whipping around the tower suddenly intensified, howling like a hungry beast. Only one piece remains, Detective. The fluid that is not fluid. It waits where the dead are buried and the red thread began. Your time is running short. Find the mausoleum before the red thread consumes the city. The speaker exploded in a shower of sparks. The wind stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The mausoleum. The only remaining stolen piece was the vial of non-human fluid. The clock was nearing its end. The implications of the revelation that the missing girl Sarah was the sister of Captain Morales's dead partner, Detective Mark Delacroix, reverberated through the squad. It explained Jonas Reed's intimate knowledge of Morales's past and his manipulation of the 7 cases. Reed wasn't just connecting crimes, he was weaponizing the emotional architecture of the Atheria PD. The final piece of stolen evidence was the vial containing the dark, viscous, non-human fluid. Case 44B, 2018. The final location clue, it waits where the dead are buried and the red thread began. Find the mausoleum. The St. Jude's Perpetual Mausoleum was a vast, sprawling complex in Atheria's oldest cemetery. It was known as the starting point of the Weaver's first crime, the location where the victim of the Iron Doll murders, Jessica Hayes, was first investigated before her body was found at the Riverside Mill. Eli and Morales arrived under the cloak of a deep, moonless night. The silence of the cemetery was profound, broken only by the distant sounds of the city and the crunch of gravel under their tires. They found the mausoleum's central chamber, a massive, vaulted room lined with marble crypts. The air was cold, scented with stone dust and decay. The chamber was empty, save for one object, a large, antique metal scale, the kind used for weighing evidence. It was placed directly in the center of the room, on a small, marble pedestal. On one pan of the scale, carefully balanced, was the last piece of stolen evidence. The vial of non-human fluid, on the other pan of the scale, placed to achieve a perfect, impossible balance, was a single, new rotary telephone. It was identical to the others, set to the number 7, but this time, it was painted entirely red. Eli noticed the base of the pedestal. Etched deep into the marble, glowing faintly under his flashlight beam, was the stylized symbol of the 7 crescent. The red phone rang instantly, its bell sharp and deafening in the vaulted space. Eli didn't wait. He moved to the phone and put it on speaker. The Weaver's wet whisper filled the chamber, sounding less like a whisper now and more like a low, confident growl. The red thread is complete, Detective. 7 pieces. 7 lives. 7 lies. Jonas, Morales cut in, her voice raw with years of buried anger. Tell me what you did to Mark Delacroix. And why Sarah? The voice chuckled, a sickening, phlegmy sound. Mark, he found the red thread 30 years ago. He realized the bite and the prism and the tooth were all related to a central pattern. He tried to tell the city about the Weaver, but the system protected me. The system? The police force? Eli demanded. The system of silence, Detective Vance. The system of convenience. I was the one who investigated his sister's disappearance. I told him the box held nothing. He tried to go public. He tried to expose the first connection. The voice paused, then delivered the final, horrific twist. So, I showed him the ultimate piece. The 0 point. The vial. The Weaver then revealed the terrifying truth of the last piece of evidence. That vial, Detective. That non-human fluid from case 44B. It wasn't animal. It was a synthesized reagent. A chemical created to mimic human neurological decay when mixed with blood. It was the key to creating the perfect death, a death that looked like a sudden, natural cardiac event. A cold dread settled over Morales. Mark's death, a tragic, unexpected heart attack in the line of duty, the Weaver confirmed, his voice laced with venomous satisfaction. I used the fluid. I silenced the one person who saw the whole tapestry. The red thread began with Sarah and ended with Mark. The mausoleum is where he's buried. Eli looked at the scale. The perfect balance between the vial of synthetic death and the red foam. The equilibrium was the price of the city's silence. What do you want, Jonas? Eli asked, his voice steady. The city will pay for its silence, Detective. The fluid in that vial is now in the city's main filtration system. A slow, systemic death, mimicking mass cardiac failure. 72 hours was the timer for the fluid to reach maximum saturation. You have less than 2 hours left. The red foam suddenly dissolved into a cloud of black smoke, leaving behind a small, square piece of copper. Etched onto the copper was a single coordinate, pointing to the heart of the city's power grid. The game was over. The Weaver had solved his own final case. The red thread had been woven, and the final stage was mass casualty. The realization that the city was now poisoned, and that the mass casualty event would begin in less than 2 hours, jolted the entire police department into frantic motion. The copper plate from the dissolved red foam gave Eli and Morales the exact coordinates of the target, Atheria Grid Substation 7, the primary power regulator. He's targeting the power grid to accelerate the fluid's effect, Eli explained to Morales as they sped away from the mausoleum. The filtration system is driven by that substation. If he overloads it, he floods the city with the poison faster and cripples our ability to issue an evacuation order. Morales, though visibly strained by the revelation about Mark Delacroix and Sarah, was all business. We hit the substation with a reinforced unit. Non-lethal force authorized. We stop Jonas Reed from overloading the grid, we secure the facility, and we find the source of the fluid injection. Substation 7 was an immense, humming cage of high-voltage transformers and buzzing conduits, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. The power station was always heavily secured, but the Weaver had already proven the system was his to command. As they approached, the emergency lights surrounding the substation flickered violently, plunging the area into temporary darkness before sputtering back to life with a sickly orange glow. "He knows we're here," Eli muttered, grabbing his shotgun. They breached the main access gate, which was mysteriously unlocked. Inside, the rhythmic thrum of the massive power system was being distorted by a high-pitched, oscillating whine, a sound of machinery being pushed past its critical limit. They found Jonas Reed, the Weaver, in the main control room, a brightly lit, antiseptic space filled with monitors and flashing danger indicators. Reed was unrecognizable. He was wearing a heavy, dark, mechanic's jumpsuit, and his face was obscured by an old, dark leather welding mask, the no-face from the child's drawing, brought to life. He was hunched over a console, rapidly typing commands, surrounded by two final, sinister displays. The first was an array of monitors, showing a looped video feed. The video showed all 7 stolen artifacts: the bite, the noose, the tooth, the box, the prism, the drawing, and the fluid, being systematically pulverized and incinerated in a specialized furnace. The thread was being destroyed, leaving no evidence behind. The second display was a massive, old-school seismograph, its needle wildly swinging, charting not geological activity, but the pressure of the water flow through the city's pipe system. The needle was spiking toward the red line, the impending 0 hour. Morales didn't hesitate. "Jonas Reed, drop the controls and surrender." The Weaver didn't look up. His voice, muffled and distorted by the mask, echoed in the room. "The system demands the 0, Captain. The 0 of justice. The 0 of life." He typed a final, long string of code. An alarm blared, red lights flashing across the entire console. The oscillating whine of the machinery outside became a deafening screech. He just initiated the full overload. Eli shouted, realizing the finality of the action. Morales fired a non-lethal round, hitting Reed's shoulder, forcing him to momentarily step away from the console. Clutching the wound, Eli seized the opening. Running to the console, he saw the sequence. The overload was irreversible by simple code commands. Reed had engineered a physical failure. Reed, despite his injury, lunged toward a massive, exposed emergency circuit breaker near the wall, a cylindrical metal structure covered in danger warnings. The red thread breaks the circuit. The Weaver roared through the mask. If he pulled that lever, the city's power grid would suffer a catastrophic shutdown, causing a massive pressure spike in the water pipes. A water hammer effect that would instantly inject the full concentration of the deadly fluid into the city's central arteries. Morales fired a second time, but Reed was too close to the breaker. He threw his weight against the handle, forcing it down with a grinding metallic scream. Just as the handle reached the bottom of its arc, Eli threw himself at the console, desperately pulling 2 large, color-coded wires, red and green, out of their housing. A massive crack of electrical discharge filled the room. The lights went out completely. The screeching machinery outside fell silent. The city went instantly, totally dark. The overload had been stopped, but not before the power was completely cut. Atheria was plunged into a citywide blackout. Eli looked back. The Weaver, Jonas Reed, was gone, having vanished into the complete darkness. But the seismograph's needle, though dropping, had registered a critical spike just before the power died. The fluid was still in the system. The timer was still running. Eli pulled out his tactical flashlight and pointed it at Morales. She was unharmed, but her eyes were fixed on the control console. A final, small object lay where the red and green wires had been, the small, metallic copper wire noose, one of the 7 pieces of evidence, somehow left behind by Reed to complete the thread. Underneath it was a sticky, dark residue, the last of the synthesized fluid. The blackout was the Weaver's final shield. Eli knew they had minutes, maybe seconds, before the city realized it was poisoned and descended into chaos. They had to restore power and issue a warning. The next target had to be the backup generator, buried deep beneath the substation. The sudden, absolute darkness in Substation 7 was the signal. The city of Atheria had gone silent, a massive, unmoving shape under a moonless sky. The power outage was critical, but the more immediate danger was the poison now surging through the pipes. Eli and Morales, guided by their tactical flashlights, moved immediately toward the reinforced hatch leading to the underground power core, the backup diesel generator. They had to restore power, not just to light the city, but to run the massive filtration system in reverse and attempt to purge the deadly fluid. The hatch was secured with a heavy magnetic lock. Eli used a crowbar and sheer brute force to wrench it open, the metal screaming in protest. They descended a long, narrow metal staircase into the humid, enclosed bunker. The air here was thick with the scent of oil and diesel, and the humidity made the walls slick. They knew the Weaver was down here. He was the master of the blackout, and this was his final hiding place. The generator room was vast, dominated by 2 colossal diesel engines, the city's final failsafe. They were inert, waiting for manual activation. As they entered, the silence was shattered by a low, rhythmic scraping sound, metal against concrete, coming from behind the massive, silent generator units. "Jonas! Show yourself!" Morales' voice echoed sharply. The scraping stopped. A moment later, a beam of light from a powerful headlamp sliced through the darkness, aimed directly at them. The Weaver stepped out from behind the generator, still wearing the obscuring, dark leather welding mask. He held a length of copper pipe, sharpened at one end like a makeshift spear. The red thread binds the silence. "Captain." Reed's distorted voice hissed. "I gave you the blueprint. I gave you the key. You chose the wrong circuit." Eli saw the generator's manual ignition panel. It was smashed, the wires twisted and cut. Reed wasn't just hiding, he was performing an act of final, absolute sabotage. Morales fired 3 successive rounds, hitting Reed in the leg and chest. The Weaver staggered, the pipe falling to the ground, but the impact only seemed to fuel his maniacal drive. He lunged forward, charging them. Eli tackled him, slamming the heavy, masked figure against the hard metal wall of the generator casing. The leather mask cracked, momentarily revealing a bloodshot eye filled with years of festering resentment and madness. "Why, Jonas? Why Sarah? Why Mark?" Eli demanded, pinning the man down. Reed spat out a guttural sound, not words, but pure rage. He tried to reach for a heavy, discarded wrench near the ground. Morales delivered a swift, concussive blow to Reed's temple with the butt of her rifle. The Weaver went limp, the darkness finally engulfing his conscious malice. The danger was neutralized, but the problem remained. The power was out, the generator was disabled, and the poison was still flowing. Eli rushed to the generator panel. The wiring was complex, expertly sabotaged. It would take an hour for a trained engineer to sort out the sequence, time they didn't have. He noticed the red and green wires he had ripped from the main console, the key to stopping the grid failure. They were lying coiled near his feet. He looked at the broken manual panel. The start sequence was initiated by a combination of 2 terminals, one marked D, diesel flow, and one marked A, arc initiation. Then, he remembered the Weaver's final display, the 7 pieces of evidence being incinerated. All those pieces of proof destroyed, except for the one remaining piece that always came back, the copper wire noose found at the substation, Eli grabbed the long, thin strands of the copper noose and realized the intent. Reed hadn't left it behind to taunt them. He left it as a final, desperate instruction, hidden within his own chaos. The copper noose was the perfect, highly conductive bridge. Eli took the red wire he had ripped out and connected it to the D terminal. He took the green wire and connected it to the terminal. Then, he took the delicate strands of the copper noose and, using it as a jumper, connected the bare end of the green wire to a positive lead on the massive generator battery. It was a reckless, desperate bypass. With a shuddering cough and a cloud of thick, black diesel smoke, the first generator unit roared to life. Then the second followed. Power was restored. Lights flickered back on across Atheria, and the thrum of machinery returned. Eli immediately contacted command. Power restored at Substation 7. Emergency filtration purge initiated. The Weaver is neutralized. But we have a final problem. The last piece of evidence. He walked back to the unconscious Reed and pulled off the cracked welding mask. The man beneath was Detective Jonas Reed, pale and bleeding, a figure consumed by his own web of crimes and secrets. Pinned to Reed's jumpsuit was a final note, written in his own, neat handwriting. The red thread is permanent. The fluid can be purged. But the Weaver's truth is buried in the heart of Atheria. Seek the final 7. Reed's eyes flooded open, staring at Eli with cold, unwavering certainty. It's not over, Vance. The 7, they're waiting. The 72-hour clock had run out, the crisis averted, but the final, terrifying chapter of the Weaver's plan was yet to be revealed. With the generator roaring and the emergency purge underway, the immediate threat of mass poisoning was contained. Authorities issued a citywide advisory about contaminated water and a temporary boil order, attributing the crisis to systemic infrastructure failure. The police department, however, knew the terrifying truth. Jonas Reed, the Weaver, was secured and transported to a high-security isolation ward. The focus shifted from stopping the collapse to decoding Reed's final, chilling message. The Weaver's truth is buried in the heart of Atheria. Seek the final 7. Eli and Morales returned to the station, the main building now lit by the recovered power but still feeling cold, contaminated by the Weaver's infection. Eli reviewed the timeline, piecing together the true red thread. The Weaver's truth, Sarah Delacroix, Kincaid Reed covered up her disappearance in 1982. The empty wooden box was the first lie. Mark Delacroix, Reed murdered him with the synthesized fluid years later to prevent him from exposing the truth about Sarah and the wider pattern. The 7 cases. All were orchestrated by Reed in various stages of his career, using the 7 stolen objects as evidence of his power and control over the city's narrative of crime. The final 7, Morales murmured, tapping the case notes. 7 crimes. 7 pieces of evidence. 7 years of silence. Eli looked at the evidence board, where the information was neatly laid out, the stolen items, the locations, the dates. He focused on the number of victims, 7 known victims across the 6 murders, plus Sarah. 8, but the Weaver always used 7. Eli stared at the Iron Doll file, Jessica Hayes, the first victim of the bite mark, found at the Riverside Mill. He looked at the silent witness file, the unnaturally white human tooth. He looked at the Prism murders, the shard of colored glass. He didn't just connect the crimes, Captain. He made them all lead back to one man, Mark Delacroix. He framed Mark after his death. Morales shook her head slowly. Mark was a hero. He was murdered. How could Jonas frame a dead man? Eli pointed to the photo of the 7 pieces of evidence on the Weaver's incinerator screen. The 7 is not the number of crimes. It's the number of bodies he wants us to find. The first 7 were the physical artifacts. The final 7 are the 7 witnesses, people who knew the truth, but were silenced. He grabbed the original, unredacted police files. He started digging into the peripheral characters, the witnesses, the lab techs, the retired officers who had all touched one of the 7 cases. He found 7 names that consistently reappeared in the supporting documentation of the stolen files. An old pathologist from the Iron Doll case, a retired evidence custodian who handled Sarah's box, a journalist who broke a story on the Serpent Killer, a security guard who discovered the Phantom, sculptor Scene, a former partner of Reed's on the Silent Witness case, a botanist who analyzed the plants at the lighthouse abduction site, the detective who first signed off on Mark Delacroix's natural death certificate. All 7 were retired, relocated, or seemingly living quiet, civilian lives. Eli felt the cold creep in again. The Weaver hadn't just stolen evidence, he had performed a ritualistic cleansing of the paper trail. Just then, a dispatcher's voice cut across the police radio, frantic and uncontrolled. "We have 7 simultaneous 911 calls across the city. 7 different addresses. Reports of forced entry, no victims cited, but something was left behind." Eli and Morales exchanged the look of utter dread. The Weaver's second phase was in motion. Even from his confinement, Eli grabbed the list of the 7 silenced witnesses. He read the addresses given by the dispatcher. They matched perfectly. "The final 7, Eli whispered. "He didn't need to kill them, Captain. He just needed to send us to find what he left behind." Morales grabbed her coat. "Split the teams. Eli, you take the closest one. We're looking for the truth buried in the heart of Atheria." The Weaver said where the silence breaks. He meant the silence of the witnesses. Eli's first location was the small, unassuming house of the retired evidence custodian, the man who had last seen Sarah's empty wooden box before it was catalogued. Eli drove into the second silence, the eerie, controlled quiet of a scene where the true horror was not the death, but the discovery. Detective Vance arrived at the modest, suburban home of Arthur Wells, the retired evidence custodian. The police tape was already up, glowing faintly in the returning city lights. The front door was ajar, split open by forced entry. Inside, the house was immaculate, undisturbed, a portrait of quiet retirement. Eli found Wells, unharmed but terrified, sitting on his couch, wrapped in a blanket. "He didn't touch me," Wells stammered, his eyes wide with shock. He showed me something. He showed me what I did." In the center of the living room floor, arranged like a shrine, were 2 items, a shovel, its head caked with fresh, dark earth, and a small, wooden replica of a police evidence marker, numbered 77. "The Weaver brought me the soil, Detective," Wells whispered, pointing to a small, fresh mound of dirt placed neatly on his carpet. "He brought the soil and told me the box wasn't empty. It contained the first piece of the red thread, a small, silver earring, Sarah Kincaid's. I saw it, Mark Delacroix saw it, and I told Reed it held nothing. The empty box was the first lie. The earring, which would have linked Sarah to her family, was suppressed, allowing the missing person case to cool. Simultaneously, reports flooded in from the other 6 locations visited by the Weaver. Morales coordinated the findings. The pathologist found a printout of an altered autopsy report showing the Iron Doll bite was not animalistic, but surgically fabricated. The evidence custodian, Wells, found the dirt and the marker 77, proving the first lie. The journalist found an unsent letter from Mark Delacroix detailing his intent to expose the department's role in the cover-up. The security guard found a logbook detailing a late-night meeting between Jonas Reed and a senior officer at the Phantom Sculptor crime scene. Reed's former partner found a map marked with the 7 crescent symbol, highlighting the central communications tower as the meeting place for the conspirators. The botanist found a file proving the plants at the lighthouse abduction site were exotic, only available from the Atheria University Horticulture Lab, where Reed's wife worked. The detective on Delacroix's death found a signed affidavit retracting his natural causes ruling, stating the fluid was suspicious. The Weaver's true final act was not poisoning the city, but exposing the city's highest-level police corruption. The 7 pieces of evidence were just props in a show to force the department to see the truth that 7 officials had buried. Eli drove to the central station, where Morales was now overseeing the mounting evidence of a massive, decades-long conspiracy. "It wasn't just Reed, Eli," Morales said, her voice heavy with betrayal. The initial cover-up of Sarah, the suppression of the Iron Doll evidence, Mark's fabricated death certificate, it was a network of high-ranking officers who protected the Weaver, who helped him hide his crimes for over 30 years. She pointed to the map found at Reed's former partner's house. The symbol of the 7 crescent wasn't just Jonas Reed's mark, it was the insignia of their secretive, corrupt unit, founded in 1971, the year of the Prism murders. The red thread wasn't 7 cases, it was the 7 members of the unit, who had buried the evidence of the original crime, the Prism murders, committed by the unit's co-founder. The Weaver's truth is buried in the heart of Atheria, not in a crypt, but in the corrupt heart of the police department itself. Eli looked at Morales. "Now, Captain," the last honest officer standing in the contaminated ranks.